Welcome to the fourth episode of Spooks and Stitches. My name is Sheena Perrell. I am an author and knitwear designer, and if you like what you see here, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, or share this video so we can bring in more viewers. So this is actually my second attempt at recording this episode. First one I did on Saturday. I got some bad news late Friday night, and I wasn't feeling it. My energy was down. I wasn't feeling all that enthusiastic, and it just kind of, I didn't like the results. So it's Monday now, and we are re-recording, and I'm recording on a Monday because the bad news I got on Friday was that my contract for my new job had been terminated. So it was a temp job. It's fine. I'm just going to be temping a little while longer, but I am excited about a few things, and I wanted to share and prepare you all because this week is the week that I get my severance pay from my last job, my last proper job. I also get my first paycheck. I have not been paid in a month because unemployment is stupid. And I've been in limbo for the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that. So I'm getting paid this week, and it's more money than I usually get. So what I'm going to do is on Thursday, I'm going to do my own personal yarn crawl and drive up to northern Seattle, where all of the yarn shops are apparently, and take a tour of all the places that I haven't been able to get to previously because of COVID and my work schedule. Now, we do have a couple of yarn shops down here in the area where I'm at. I'm not super impressed with them. Like, they're okay. One of them is knitting and sewing stuff. They also do a lot of like weaving and dyeing things, which is cool, but their yarn selection, they just don't sell a lot of, they just don't sell a lot of the more unique stuff that I'm looking for. They don't really have a lot in the way of hand dyed or indie dyers. They don't carry Malabrigo or Madeline Tosh, anything like that. So I'm going to look around at these other places and see what I can find, what's available, if they sell any local dyers. And then the other thing that's happening is I had placed a yarn order almost 2 weeks ago now with Knitpicks for some projects that are upcoming. So I'm going to be doing a major yarn haul, and I'll get to show everything off to you guys. And we might even do some reorganization in the stash, which means doing a stash tour. And the last thing that's happening is, since I have all of this time on my hands, at least for the next couple of days until my next contract comes through, I'm going to be looking at doing a 24-hour knitting challenge. And it's just going to be like a knit with me for 24 hours, but it's probably going to end up being more like 36, just because I have chronic fatigue and I will need to sleep in there because of my chronic illness. I'm sorry, our weather has been changing a little bit here, and that always makes my sinuses go crazy. So I have a little bit of a frog in my throat this morning. I'm not sick or anything. It's just sinuses are stupid, almost as stupid as unemployment. So I'm kind of struggling with that this morning, and I don't really know why. So that is what is coming up this week. I'm just going to throw myself full tilt into having a yarny week. I also need to work on writing up a pattern because I have a finished object for you. So I showed this to you last week and it was almost done, and this is the finished espresso tank. So I'm going to insert some photos of me wearing it just because I don't have a lot of space in my filming corner. But this was knit. You start off with base of the straps right here, work up and over, and then do increases, join across here, and then work your way down. In the ribbing in the back right here, and also in the front, gives it just a little bit of faux shaping. So even though it's pretty much a straight tube, your stitch count stays the same. It gives the effect of being fitted. And then on this one, I used up every scrap of 200 gram skeins to make this. This is like a women's 1X, something like that. And I couldn't figure out how I wanted to do the hem. And I was thinking about ribbing, but I didn't want it to cinch in any, and I didn't think that was going to look good with the drape of the top. I thought about doing some kind of a picot edging, but I was afraid it was going to turn up. I thought about doing a lace edging and just decided that I couldn't be arsed. So finally I decided to do a folded hem. So knit down straight, hit the hem, and then you can see that little row of purl bumps that makes a little crease where you fold it over and then continue knitting. And what I did is, instead of binding off, I took some extra yarn and sewed the live stitches into the body of the sweater, so it's held in place. It has some nice stretch to it, and I ran out of the pink and black. So like I said, I used up every scrap of this yarn. It's discontinued. It's been discontinued for years. And so this is actually a different sock yarn. It was pink, yellow with black speckles. So it's similar to the Hollywood. It's the same weight, it's the same shades of pink, but it's a different manufacturer. So it's just like a little bit of a sneaky peek right there, where it's a little bit different, a little Easter egg, if you will. So this is all done. I'm going to be working on writing up the pattern the next couple of days while I'm not working. And then this will be available on Ravelry and also on my Gumroad shop, which links down below. So this top is the first in a collection I'm working on, which is called the Cafe Collection. And I think it's going to be about 9 pieces, but I'm not entirely sure just yet. I'm still working on it. This is the first piece from it. The second piece is currently in timeout, thinking about what it's done, because I've frogged it so many times and it shouldn't be that hard, but apparently sometimes I'm just an idiot. And then I'm going to be working on some accessories for it as well. There's going to be socks, a hat, a pair of mitts. I currently have 3 sweaters planned, but those are going to take me a little while because I've never designed a sweater before. I have made sweaters. I have even self-drafted them, but I've never written down the pattern for them. So I need to find a tech editor who can help me do the pattern grading and make sure that everything lines up for the different sizes, because I knit them in my size or the size of the recipient. Looking at works in progress, well, I guess this is kind of a finished object. So I finished that stash sock with the Purple Lamb Monet's Water Lilies. This is a women's size 9. It's my basic vanilla sock recipe, which is cast on 60 stitches, 10 rounds of ribbing, and then I work basically the length of my hand for the leg. This one I did a heel flap pick up 16 stitches and then decrease for the foot, and then just like a regular toe there, and then Kitchener 12 stitches at the toe. So this is the first one. I'll show it to you on sock blockers once I get the full set done. I finished this one. I'm holding off on casting on the second sock because I'm part of a group on Ravelry, the Harry Potter and Knit and Crochet House Cap. We do not support the author. This is a group that was founded well before the author started showing her whole entire ass to the internet. So it's a very supportive and inclusive group. And it's just kind of a game where you get homework to knit to a prompt. And there's a whole bunch of different classes. And you can play Quidditch and score points for your house. I'm typically a Ravenclaw, but this time around I sorted into Hufflepuff just to check out some of the different houses. So I'm holding off on casting on the second sock because our classes start over each month. So if you have something that you start in September, you have to turn it in September to get the most points. You can still turn it in October and get detention, which is like partial points, but that's a set number of points. So I'm holding off casting on until October starts, and then I can turn in some new projects. And I have enough whips right now that I'm trying to get done that I'm fine with that. I have a lot of stuff on the needles right now. The other thing that I'm trying to get done this week, which will be a major part of my 24-hour knit-a-thon or 36-hour knit-a-thon, is the scarf for Ash. So I'm finally on the downhill slope of this. I'm not enjoying knitting this scarf, I'm going to be honest. It is a linen rayon blend with something else. I can't remember what the third fiber is. It is... I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the label from across the room. I want to say it's Louisa Harding. I could be wrong about that. I'll have all the information in the notes. But I've gone through the first color progression from the light gray to the medium gray to the green. And I knit up the entire ball of green. And now we're starting on the medium gray again. So I'm more than halfway done, and it's coming along quickly because it is so narrow. I mean, it's only that wide. That's the back, but it's only that wide. It's fine, but it's a vegetable fiber yarn, and I don't know if you can see on camera. Hang on. So that is what the yarn looks like. And it's not showing up very well, but it's kind of fuzzy and not in like a soft alpaca-y way. There's bits of, vegetable matter basically sticking out from the linen. And because linen gets softer as you use it, and this is, brand new off the ball yarn, the pieces sticking out just feel like dry grass. They're not super comfortable, and I keep pulling them out. Here, that's a piece I just pulled out, which still isn't showing up on camera, but it just feels like there's dried grass sticking out of it. It kind of feels like hemp rope, because that's basically what it is. It's hemp. That's what linen is. And, well, flax. So it's not that fun to work with the yarn. I'm using a pair of plastic interchangeables. I don't even remember what brand they are. I got them as a free sample at a trade show eons ago, and I just don't like them. This is the only needle I have in this size. I don't like plastic needles to begin with, but I use this size infrequently enough that it wasn't worth it to go out and buy a new needle. So I'm just not enjoying the process, but I'm almost done. And I think if I just, you know, put in a couple of movies and plug away at it, I'll be done relatively quickly. I just need to sit down and do it. And actually this morning, I knit about that much this morning. I really need to start putting progress keepers in my projects for you guys. So that is that scarf. And what else do I want to show you? So we've recently been organizing all of our sewing stuff, and I forgot that I had this bag. This is from the vintage Singer stuff that they have at Joann's. I got this a couple years ago, and we were using it to hold sewing supplies, but when we reorganized, we didn't need it anymore. So now I have a waterproof project bag. If I can get it to open. So I think I mentioned a couple weeks ago, or at least I mentioned it in my writing vlog, that I needed a copy editor. And because of the stuff with my employment, I haven't had the money to hire one. Editors range in price from $300 to $500. It's quite expensive, and it's well worth it. It's just not money that I had laying around at the time. So I kind of jokingly posted on Ravelry that I needed a copy editor willing to work for knitwear, and I found one. So I have a very qualified friend in Scotland who did the copy editing for Colors in the Dark, which will be out on October 5th. Details down below. And I told her, if you're serious, send me your shoe size and I will start knitting. So she sent me her shoe size and her favorite colors. Now, this is somebody that I met through a Harry Potter club that I mentioned earlier. She's a fellow Ravenclaw. And I was going through, when I read her message, I was just like, oh, I know exactly what yarn would be perfect, because it had all of her favorite colors in it. And I don't know, it's not going to show up very well on camera, but I'll try and tilt it so it hits the light. It is black, but like not quite true black. It's got a little bit of bluish and reddish undertones to it, and then it has some like purple and blue tonal going through it. So this is Knitpicks Stroll, and I had to laugh when I pulled off the label and I sent her a picture of it, because we met through Ravenclaw, and the name of the colorway is Raven Tonal. So this is very fitting, and I'm going to get these mailed off to her as soon as I get them done. This is the first sock. I've just finished up the heel and I'm working on the foot. This is my same top-down sock recipe as the other one, except this one I used a short row heel. I've been going back and forth, and I think I actually like the short row heels better. I think that they're more comfortable inside the shoe. And I'm sorry, our landscapers are here. I live in an apartment complex. There's nothing I can do about it. So let's just take a latte break, and I'll be back when they go elsewhere. think they're gone for the moment. There might still be a low hum in the distance, but we will try and finish up before they come back. Unfortunately, when you live in an apartment, there are certain sounds that you just have to deal with. You learn to tune them out for a little while, after a little while, like my upstairs neighbor's barking dog, or landscapers, or the construction up the road. You just get used to it after a while. I've learned to tune out the airplanes because we're on a flight path. You can hear one right now, probably. It's life in the city in an apartment, and I'm sorry, there's not much I can do about it, even in post, because I'm not that skilled of an editor yet. So my last work in progress I'm going to show you right now is actually a swatch. So there's been a trend lately for holding mohair double with like a fingering to DK worsted weight yarn, and it creates a nice fuzzy halo. It's supposed to be super soft. I don't like mohair. I don't like that fuzzy halo. I think it's prickly. I have texture issues, and that texture bothers me. I might be slightly allergic to mohair. I know Ash is allergic to mohair. It sheds all over the place. I don't like it. But it occurred to me that I did have some lace weight in my stash. So this is Knitpicks Chroma in red velvet. It is lace weight. And then this is Indigo Dragonfly. Cariba, I think, is the name of the base. And another plain, I'm sorry. And the color is a trophy wife or atrophy wife. I'm not sure. It's part of their fandom line from a few years ago. I don't know what fandom it is. I think I got this in a swap, but I mean, it's a very nice sock yarn. So I'm holding these two together, and I'm going to make a sweater vest because I have a slight obsession with sweater vests and vests in general, but because I am busty, I have not been able to find vests that fit me correctly. So this is my swatch because I wanted to get it started. You can see that nice little tweedy effect, and how the pinks and the purples are playing together, and I love this. It doesn't have that halo effect, but I do love the color play. And while I was going through my stash, I found two other skeins of the chroma. I've got one that I lost the ball band for. I have no idea what the colorway is, but it's yellows and oranges, and I think there might be some red further deep down inside. And I found a beautiful coral cotton yarn that I'm going to hold it double with, but I don't think I have enough of that yarn. It was a cotton that I got just to try out, so I can order more. I don't think I'm going to be able to find the same exact dye lot, but I should be able to get more of it. And then the third skein that I found is Cousteau. Cousteau is the name of it, and it is variations of light blue, dark blue into like a purpley indigo color. And I'm going to hold that with a lace weight that is, it always makes me think of a Dalmatian when I see it, even though it's light blue, but it's light blue with these black speckles on it. And I think that those two are going to look really great together. And that one, because of the yardage of the lace weight, the chroma is actually in fingering. So I've got a second ball of chroma in Cousteau sitting in my Knitpicks cart that is just waiting to be brought in for me to click order once I get paid so that I can hold those double. And that one, I think what I want to do is hold them double for the bodice of a sweater, and then use the lace weight on its own to make these sheer lightweight sleeves and make it Potentially long sleeve. I don't know if there's enough yardage for that, but I think I should still get pretty far with it. So that's my plan right now. I don't know when I'm going to cast those on, but it's going to happen at some point in the future. So I think that's it for works in progress. The only other thing I've got is the Flamingo blanket. Which I haven't worked on outside of the podcast, but you will see it once we switch over to voiceover Sheena and our spooky tale for this week. But I think that means that it is time for our sponsorship break, because it's my podcast and I'm sponsoring it. So our book this week is Off the Rails. And Off the Rails is a historical mystery with ghosts. It's very heavily based on the real world. I don't consider it a fantasy. I don't consider it a fantasy novel. I consider it historical fiction, even though there are ghosts in it. So the main character, Sophia Andrews, is married to a railroad magnate. And at the start of the Civil War, he enlisted. He didn't have to, but he felt that it was his duty. He's an inventor, and he signed up with, they eventually become the Army Corps of Engineers, but that's not the name that they had in the Civil War. Goes to Washington, D.C. He serves his time during the war, and he's about to be mustered out. But before that happens, Sophia wakes up in the middle of the night to find his spirit standing at the foot of her bed, and she knows that he's gone. Now, this is after the fighting has stopped. He's supposed to be safe at this point. So she goes to the army to find out what's happened, and they just tell her he died in the line of duty. He was jumped in the middle of the street by some Confederate supporters. Nothing more to the story than that. It's a tragic accident. But what she's seeing from his spirit doesn't line up with what the army is telling her. So she sets off on a mission to find out what happened to her husband. And she meets some amazing characters along the way. I love some of the characters. You see a Civil War photographer who is based on some of the photographers that were taking battlefield photos at the time. She meets female nurses and former soldiers, and there's a really interesting cast of characters that I just love in this book. And her quest takes her from Buffalo, New York, where she's from, to Washington, D.C., to this isolated sanatorium in the middle of nowhere. And she's running out of time because the killer is onto her, and if she doesn't want to be the next one to die, she needs to uncover who it is ASAP. This is a very emotional book for me. It doesn't come with the mental health warnings that some of my other work does, but it does deal heavily with grief because her husband dies on the first page. So a lot of this was pulled from my own experiences. I was writing this book right around the time my grandfather died. So I'm not a widow, I've never been married, but I know what it's like to lose someone close to you, and a lot of that feeling went into this book. So that is Off the Rails. It is available on Amazon in paperback or Kindle. You can also find EPUB, PDF, and Mobi over on my Gumroad shop. Links down below. And as always, reviews and recommendations are always welcome. So go check that out. And for our shout out this week, Poisoner's Cabinet. This is probably my favorite podcast ever. Sinead and Nick are absolutely hilarious. They are Brits. Sinead is Irish. I think she's Northern Irish. Could be wrong about that, but I think she said at one point she's from the area around Belfast. But they are a couple of Brits that talk about historic murders, primarily poisonings, but they also go into other murder mysteries from the 1600s all the way straight through to like the 1960s. So if you are interested in true crime, in history, or if you just like a good cocktail, I highly recommend The Poisoner's Cabinet. That is the podcast that got me listening to podcasts again. So definitely check them out. And I think that means that it is time to switch to voiceover Sheena and listen to this week's spooky story. Now, this week, our story is kind of special to me. I found it by accident, and I did not realize that a picture book I had read in 2nd or 3rd grade was based off of this story. So, if you were also traumatized in the early 90s by In a Dark, Dark Room, leave a comment below, because that's like the litmus test Ash and I use for new friends. Like, if you know what this story is, then you're good people. Because apparently it just shaped everyone that heard this story. It's very memorable, especially when you are 7 years old. So let's go over, switch to voiceover, and grab your knitting and a drink, and let's hang out for a while and get some crocheting done. Okay, hi. We have the landscapers going again, but I just wanted to pop in for a quick section to tell you I frogged my edging. So this right here is too weak. You can see how it's pulling. I had also crammed too many stitches onto these bars the first time around, so it was like all wavy and not good. So now what I'm doing is I'm pulling it out using the same holes, and I'm using the tiniest crochet hook I own, which came from my grandma. It is 1.5 centimeters, 1.5 millimeters. I'm not sure, it's Canadian sizing from, I don't know, the 1950s. So, very old crochet hook. It has a little bit of rust on it there, but we're making it work. Pull up a chair, turn down the lights, grab your knitting and your drink of choice. It's time to start our spooky story. If this week's tale seems familiar, let me know if you too were read in a dark, dark room as a child. The story is based on an urban legend from 18th century France, though the version I am reading today was written in the early 1800s by Washington Irving. I think I might have my next Halloween costume. If you'd like to vote on the next spooky tale, check out my Patreon. Starting at just $1 a month, you can vote on videos, short stories, blog posts, and even names and plot points in my novels. For October only, the vote will be open to the public, so check out the link below and poke around a bit. You're sure to find something you enjoy. And now, without further ado, I present The Adventure of the German Student by Washington Irving. On a stormy night in the tempestuous times of the French Revolution, a young German was returning to his lodgings at a late hour across the old part of Paris. The lightning gleamed and the loud claps of thunder rattled through the lofty narrow streets. But I should first tell you something about this young German. Gottfried Wolfgang was a young man of good family. He had studied for some time at Göttingen, but being of a visionary and enthusiastic character, he had wandered into those wild and speculative doctrines which have so often bewildered German students. His secluded life, his intense application, and the singular nature of his studies had an effect on both mind and body.
His health was impaired, his imagination diseased. He had been indulging in fanciful speculations on spiritual essences until, like Swedenborg, he had an ideal world of his own around him. He took up a notion, I do not know from what cause, that there was an evil influence hanging over him, an evil genius or spirit seeking to ensnare him and ensnare his perdition. Such an idea, working on his melancholy temperament, produced a most gloomy effect. He became haggard and desponding. His friends discovered the mental malady preying upon him and determined that the best cure was a change of scene. He was sent, therefore, to finish his studies amidst the splendors and gaieties of Paris. Wolfgang arrived at Paris at the breaking out of the Revolution. The popular delirium at first caught his enthusiastic mind, and he was captivated by the political and philosophical theories of the day, but the scenes of blood which followed shocked his sensitive nature, disgusted him with society and the world, and made him more than ever a recluse. He shut himself up in a solitary apartment of the Pays Latin, the quarter of students. There, in a gloomy street not far from the monastic walls of the Sorbonne, he pursued his favorite speculations. Sometimes he spent hours together in the great libraries of Paris, those catacombs of departed authors, rummaging among their hoards of dusty and obsolete works in the quest for food for his unhealthy appetite. He was, in a manner, a literary ghoul, feeding on the charnel house of decayed literature. Wolfgang, though solitary and recluse, was of an ardent temperament, but for a time it operated merely upon his imagination. He was too shy and ignorant of the world to make any advances to the fair, but he was a passionate admirer of female beauty, and in his lonely chamber would often lose himself in reveries on forms and faces which he had seen, and his fancy would deck out images of loveliness far surpassing the reality. While his mind was in this excited and sublimated state, a dream produced an extraordinary effect on him. It was of a female face of transcendent beauty. So strong was the impression made that he dreamt of it again and again. It haunted his thoughts by day, his slumbers by night. In fine, he became passionately enamored of this shadow of a dream. This lasted so long that it became one of those fixed ideas which haunt the minds of melancholy men, and are at times mistaken for madness. Such was Gottfried Wolfgang, and such his situation at the time I mentioned. He was returning home late on a stormy night, through some of the old gloomy streets of the Marais, the ancient part of Paris. The loud claps of thunder rattled among the high houses of the narrow streets. He came to the Place de Grève, a square where public executions were performed. The lightning quivered about the pinnacles at the ancient Hôtel de Ville, and shed flickering gleams over the open spaces in front. As Wolfgang was crossing the square, he shrank back with horror at finding himself close by the guillotine. It was the height of the Reign of Terror, when this dreadful instrument of death stood ever ready, and its scaffold was continually running with the blood of the virtuous and the brave. It had that very day been actively employed in the work of carnage, and there it stood in a grim array amidst the silent and sleeping city, waiting for fresh victims. Wolfgang's heart sickened within him, and he was turning shuddering from the horrible engine when he beheld a shadowy form, cowering, as it were, at the foot of the steps which led up to the scaffold. A succession of vivid flashes of lightning revealed it more distinctly. It was a female figure, dressed in black. She was seated on one of the lower steps of the scaffold, leaning forward, her face hid in her lap, and her long disheveled tresses hanging to the ground, streaming with the rain which fell in torrents. Wolfgang paused. There was something awful in this solitary monument of woe. The female had the appearance of being above the common order. He knew the times to be full of vicissitude, and that many a fair head which had once been pillowed on down now wandered houseless. Perhaps this was some poor mourner whom the dreadful axe had rendered desolate, and who sat here, heartbroken, on the strand of existence from which all that was dear to her had been launched into eternity. He approached and addressed her in accents of sympathy. She raised her head and gazed wildly at him. What was his astonishment at beholding, by the bright glare of the lighting, the very face which had haunted him in his dreams. It was pale and disconsolate, but ravishingly beautiful. Trembling with violent and conflicting emotions, Wolfgang again accosted her. He spoke something of her being exposed at such an hour of the night and to the fury of such a storm, and offered to conduct her to her friends. She pointed to the guillotine with a gesture of dreadful signification. "I have no friend on earth," said she. "But you have a home," said Wolfgang. "Yes, in the grave." The heart of the student melted at the words. "If a stranger dare make an offer," said he, "without danger of being misunderstood, I would offer my humble dwelling as a shelter, myself as a devoted friend. I am friendless myself in Paris, and a stranger in the land, but if my life could be of service, it is at your disposal, and should be sacrificed before harm or indignity should come to you." There was an honest earnestness in the young man's manner that had its effect. His foreign accent, too, was in his favor. It showed him not to be of the hackneyed inhabitant of Paris. Indeed, there was an eloquence in true enthusiasm that is not to be doubted. The homeless stranger confided herself implicitly to the protection of the student. He supported her faltering steps across the Pont Neuf, and by the place where the statue of Henry IV had been overthrown by the populace. The storm had abated, and the thunder rumbled in the distance. All Paris was quiet. That great volcano of human passion slumbered for a while to gather fresh strength for the next day's eruption. The student conducted his charge through the ancient streets of the Pays Latin and by the dusky walls of the Sorbonne to the great dingy hotel which he inhabited. The old portress who admitted them stared with surprise at the unusual sight of the melancholy Wolfgang with a female companion. On entering his apartment, the student for the first time blushed at the scantiness and indifference of his dwelling. He had but one chamber, an old-fashioned saloon, heavily carved and fantastically furnished with the remains of former magnificence, for it was one of those hotels in the quarter nobility. It lumbered with books and papers and all the usual apparatus of a student, and his bed stood in a recess at one end. When the lights were brought and Wolfgang had a better opportunity of contemplating the stranger, he was more than ever intoxicated by her beauty. Her face was pale, but of a dazzling fairness, set off by a profusion of raven hair that hung clustering about it. Her eyes were large and brilliant, with a singular expression approaching almost to wildness. As far as her black dress permitted her shape to be seen, it was of a perfect symmetry. Her whole appearance was highly striking, though she was dressed in the simplest style. The only thing approaching to an ornament which she wore was a broad black band around her neck, clasped with diamonds. The perplexity now commenced with the student how to dispose of the helpless being thus thrown upon his protection. He thought of abandoning his chamber to her and seeking shelter for himself elsewhere. Still, he was so fascinated by her charms, there seemed to be such a spell upon his thoughts and senses, that he could not tear himself from her presence. Her manner, too, was singular and unaccountable. She spoke no more of the guillotine. Her grief had abated. The attentions of the student had first won her confidence, and then, apparently, her heart. She was evidently an enthusiast like himself, and enthusiasts soon understand each other. In the infatuation of the moment, Wolfgang avowed his passion for her. He told her the story of his mysterious dream and how she had possessed his heart before he had even seen her. She was strangely affected by his recital and acknowledged to have felt an impulse toward him unaccountable. It was the time for wild theory and wild actions. Old prejudices and superstitions were done away. Everything was under the sway of the goddess of reason. Among other rubbish of the old times, the forms and ceremonies of marriage began to be considered superfluous bonds of honorable minds. Social compact were the vogue. Wolfgang was too much of a theorist not to be tainted by the liberal doctrines of the day. "Why should we separate?" said he. "Our hearts are united. In the eye of reason and honor we are as one. What need is there for sordid forms to bind high souls together?" The stranger listened with emotion. She had evidently received illumination at the same school. "You have no home or family," continued he. "Let me be everything to you, or rather, let us be everything to each other. If form is necessary, form shall be observed. There is my hand. I pledge myself to you forever." "Forever?" said the stranger solemnly. "Forever," repeated Wolfgang. The stranger clasped the hand extended to her. "Then I am yours," murmured she, and she sank upon his bosom. The next morning the student left his bride sleeping and sallied forth at an early hour to seek more spacious apartments suitable for the change in situation. When he returned, he found the stranger lying with her head hanging over the bed and one arm thrown over it. He spoke to her, but received no reply. He advanced to awaken her from her uneasy posture. On taking her hand, it was cold, there was no pulsation. Her face was pallid and ghastly. In a word, she was a corpse. Horrified and frantic, he alarmed the house. A scene of confusion ensued. The police were summoned. As the officer of the police entered the room, he started back on beholding the corpse. "Great heaven!" he cried. "How did this woman come here?" "Do you know anything about her?" said Wolfgang eagerly. "Do I?" exclaimed the officer. "She was guillotined yesterday." He stepped forward, undid the black collar around the neck of the corpse, and the head rolled onto the floor. The student burst into a frenzy. "The fiend! The fiend has gained possession of me!" shrieked he. "I am lost forever!" They tried to soothe him, but in vain. He was possessed with the frightful belief that an evil spirit had reanimated the dead body to ensnare him. He went distracted and died in a madhouse. Here, the old gentleman with the haunted head finished his narrative. "And is this really a fact?" said the inquisitive gentleman. "A fact not to be doubted," replied the other. "I had it from the best authority. The student told it me himself. I saw him in a madhouse in Paris." Thank you, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed that story, which I love it because it brings together Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in the references of the German student and his studies. It also brings together one of my favorite picture books from when I was little, which equally traumatized me and fascinated me. Make sure to check out the links and everything in the description, and I will see you in 2 or 3 weeks for the next podcast. Ciao.